Topic is the Great Migration and War. I'm going to first begin with the terms that you want to be familiar with by the end of this session. And the task is going to respond to prompts, analyze the sources, and you want to use the source analysis sheet. I'm going to first start out with the Great Migration. We want to treat this as a definition. This, for the most part, is the mass exodus of African Americans from the South into major cities, which is primarily happening during World War I. The issue here is that both World War I and World War II do lead to a situation of increased economic opportunity. And World War I, though, the difference is going to be that mass exodus with that Great Migration. Down here we see the motives, safety, lynching, as well as economic opportunity. What I did here is I placed a lynching image trying to address the question, why would people leave the South? And they're going to be leaving for these city jobs. This source right here is addressing this exodus to some of those particular cities. And why move out of the South into some of those northern industrial areas? Because it's about the amount of jobs that are readily available. As you see here, 960,000 pounds of TNT is being ordered. Here we see Charles Schwab with a $50 million order, 100 million. And then I placed here the guns versus butter chart. For the most part, during both wars, the United States is going to ration and scale back on the production of social goods, which would be considered butter, and promote guns, which is primarily the reason why all of these jobs are made available. Now we want to answer the question why, and this is just a personal opinion. Try to put yourself in this position of World War I. You are an African American. Do you want to fight the war but segregated? Do you want to make the goods for the war effort or do nothing? And you want to be able to defend your answer. Keep in mind that everybody probably has a valid reason for any of these particular options. One of the issues that's going to come up is the discrepancy. For example, here, this individual is arguing that he went from making $6 to over $100 a day, whereas over here, the African American is going from $2 to $40 per day. Keep in mind that these numbers are made up here. This is a reference to a book statistic. But for the most part, we still have the gap, the pay gap that exists, and that is something that is factual and documented. We're going to be looking at African Americans during wars. This chart has the war, the hope for African Americans, and then this section, the experience for the African American as he participates in this conflict. Here are two books, The Invisible Soldier, which looks at World War II, the book Bloods, which is about Vietnam. But we're going to first start out with the American Revolution, and the hope here is to gain freedom, and that seems to be the norm for all of the wars prior to Vietnam. It seems to be this attempt to try to prove your worth, pay your blood tax to society, a society that treats you as a second-class citizen, slave, depending on the decade. And during the Civil War, again, the goal here is to gain freedom. But we have some information here with the experience, as well as the song Buffalo Soldiers, because you have the segregated units even going back to that conflict, which is odd because it is about trying to end slavery. You want to analyze the song Buffalo Soldiers by Bob Marley. Here are the lyrics. And you want to be able to interpret certain phrases or certain sections, for example, stolen from Africa and brought to America. You want to be able to translate and interpret that particular section. On this slide, I expanded the wars. I've added the Spanish-American War. Notice how the hope really does not change much. We see once again the Buffalo Soldier participating in a conflict, not only the Civil War, but also the Spanish-American War. And then when we get to World War I, we're starting to see the introduction of additional soldiers. Here we have the Harlem Hellfighters. World War II, still fighting in segregated units, Tuskegee Airmen. And then we get to the Korean War, where we have the executive order that integrates the military. Then we move on to Vietnam, which is taking place during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, another image we have here is from the Spanish-American War, where we have African Americans participating in that conflict in a segregated unit. We transition to the next conflict, which is World War I, and we see that black troops did not participate in combat duty, but we do see the Harlem Hellfighters, and the Harlem Hellfighters are fighting on the battlefield. The only issue here is that they were fighting with the French army. Other than that, if you were African American serving in World War I, you were probably going to be doing low-skilled jobs, as you were not allowed to fight on the battlefield. Here we have an image from World War II of the Harlem Hellfighters. There was a comic book by Max Brooks that was made about this particular soldier. Here are some screenshots from that particular comic. As he mentions here, he's a reference to Woodrow Wilson, his war for democracy, which has to be conflicting for the African American soldier because he's being told by the president that we are entering World War I to make the world safe for democracy, yet the African American soldier and citizen does not experience that freedom and democracy that Wilson suggests they're fighting for. Here we have some oral history excerpts from this particular book here. And what becomes a common practice for the conflict for an African American soldier is to be on the battlefield primarily as a guard. Again, you're not allowed on the battlefield where you do not have any ammunition. The PX, every military base has some sort of PX or a post exchange. This is a store, and on this military base, he's telling you the story here how black soldiers were not allowed in the PX during certain times. The Negro soldier's first taste of warfare in World War II was on army posts right here in his own country. Think about what that section right there is trying to argue, because they're not only dealing with the conflict that the greater country is fighting, but they're also dealing with the internal conflict with regard to the racial problems in America. As we transition to World War II, you may remember the image of Rosie the Riveter, but what we're trying to establish here are the amount of jobs that are readily available. Economy doubles during World War II, making up 2/3 of the economy. That is a significant portion of the economy. Again, that means we're moving towards more of a gun-based economy. Look at the amount of tanks and planes and ships that are being made. So ultimately, there's a lot of money to be made from this war. Rosie the Riveter. Notice the racial makeup of all of the workers, which is going to ultimately prompt this individual, A. Philip Randolph, to plan a march on Washington. And he's advocating for an executive order because he is recognizing that for the most part, black and white defense contract workers, there's a huge gap in comparison to what white and black soldiers are making. This individual, Philip Randolph, would become the co-founder of an organization called CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, which will be a significant group during the Civil Rights Movement. And we're transitioning now to how the African Americans are going to leave the South, because remember, this is all about the Great Migration, which is prompted by all of the new jobs that are available during World War I. We're going to see people leaving the South to go to those cities to secure those jobs, but those jobs exist because of the conflict. How are they going to get there? You have organizations like the National Urban League that is trying to help. As you see in this particular image here, you see the Urban League, education, jobs, housing, trying to convince people that they should move out of the South into a better, hopeful, life in some of those northern cities. We also do not want to forget about Tulsa and the burning of Black Wall Street. This is an example of some of the violence that would also prompt a Great Migration. Underpaid and disempowered. Quick recap. Here we have all of the wars going back to the American Revolution. And we move on to World War I, 1914, which prompts the Great Migration. And that is going to lead to this exodus in the 1920s, which will eventually establish a black community in Harlem, which will then lead to the Harlem Renaissance. And I place some of those wars after World War II, which is a long way from the Harlem Renaissance that's established as a result of the Great Migration prompted by World War I. Here we have a map, an image of life in Harlem. Remember, it's to try to escape some of the brutality. We've already done a section on lynching. And I want to go back to what Du Bois was talking about, the two Americas, that double consciousness, and how those two Americas, when you are treated in a particular way, that always ends with violence. Are you going to accept the situation, or are you going to resort to anger? And in this case, it doesn't really seem to be either, as that Great Migration, you just say, let's get out of here. Let's try to avoid the situation altogether. Back to the lynching statistics, the lynching bill that never gets passed. I want to go back to the answers that you had come up with for this section. Would you fight the war segregated? Make the goods for the war effort, because if you're going to do this, you're going to be paid less. If you do nothing, keep in mind this is a valid response, because why would you want to fight for a government in a country that treats you in the manner in which African Americans have been treated prior to the conflict? But if you fight in the war segregated, that might earn you some respect, and that seems to be one of the narratives that are told with regard to African American participation during the conflicts in America. It seems to be one where we have something to prove. Now we're going to start looking at some of the letters, and you want to recreate this chart. There are 9 letters in total. We also have a map and the Jacob Lawrence painting, but these are the questions you want to focus on. How does the author describe the migration? Does the author explain how or why they migrated? How did life change after? And which theme does the letter address? Here we have 2 letters, and in this particular letter here, it's the clipping of a lynching. This individual seems to be motivated by the fear of violence, whereas in this situation, the guy writes, I am a young man and am disabled. And the disability he is experiencing is one that he is not good with his hands. This individual happens to be a teacher, but the teachers are underpaid in comparison to white teachers. 150 children without any assistance and receives only 27 a month, while the white with 30 get 100. So that right there is the hope of a better future in the North. There we have letter 3. Is it following that same theme? Can fill a position from truck. Would like Chicago or Philadelphia, but I don't care where, so long as I go where a man is a man. And then in this particular letter here, notice how he mentions the Defender, and the Defender is one of those newspapers that's trying to provide assistance for African Americans as they leave the South. As we move on to 5, we see some more financial hope. Once again, the Defender is coming up, letter 7. And then here we see that the individual is looking for education opportunity for their children. Letter 9, we see more hope that things are going to be better. Here we transition to some of the additional resources that are required. Another painting by Jacob Lawrence trying to depict the Great Migration. Notice the places. Another map of the Great Migration. And the terms you want to be able to define. Make sure you've also completed the source sheet. And if you need help with the definitions,